Mr. President, I want to follow up on the colleagues of, I think some of the senators have spoken before me. Seems like we've accepted this new normal, that shutting down the operations of the largest enterprise in America is acceptable. I want to concur with a colleague, the senator from Alaska, about the real stories and real pain that's taking place because of this government shutdown. And I commend some of my colleagues' comments who, when we read these tragic stories, whether it's around NIH, or around our veterans, or around our Park Service, say, oh, but that part of the government we want to reopen. Does that mean, Mr. President, that every other aspect of government remains closed until we can find that story? I point to my colleagues, stories that were in both the Washington Post and the New York Times today, a story that we should be celebrating about 3 American Nobel Prize winners. Well, should that mean we should now reopen the NSF? Because if the National Science Foundation isn't funded, there may not be a next generation of American Nobel Prize winners. We have to bring in a story about some child being hurt because their food or their meat or their fish wasn't inspected correctly. I got to tell you, I spent a lot longer in business than I have in politics. And I've been involved in a lot of business negotiations. But I've never been involved in a negotiation that says, during the negotiation, we have to shut down the operations of our business and inflict pain not only upon our employees, but upon the general economy across the board. That is not the way to govern. And I would agree, we've talked about stories to our federal workers, but I would agree again with the senator from Alaska. It's also the hotel owners along the Skyline Drive in our state of Virginia, the government contractors who start and stop because they don't understand what government's going to operate. The story I heard this morning of a small business outside a government facility in St. Louis. This piecemeal effect, this piecemeal approach to reopening government makes no sense. What might be better would be hear from some of those folks who want to have this piecemeal effect, what parts of the government should stay closed. This is not the way to operate. We ought to reopen this government, put our people back to work, get this economy going again, and continue the very real conversations we've got to have about getting our fiscal house in order. And what makes this, to me, in the 4.5 years I've been in the Senate, different than these previous discussions and debates, is that we have this, first in my tenure in the Senate, government shutdown, which disproportionately is hurting Virginia and Maryland, but is literally hurting every community across America. But we have this tragedy, this catastrophe, merging now into a deadline that's going to hit us next week, where there are certain members of Congress who say it's okay if America defaults. I find that stunning. If you look back, there has never been a major industrial country in modern history that has defaulted. Matter of fact, the last major country to default was Argentina back in December of 2001. In the aftermath of that default, they had over 100% per annum inflation. Every family in Argentina saw literally 60% of their net worth disappear within a few weeks. Now, America's not Argentina. But why would we even get close to that kind of potential economic catastrophe? And as has been mentioned already, America holds the record as the reserve currency for the world. When crises happen, as we've happened around the world recently, in many countries, people and capital flows into the dollar. That's because the dollar and the United States' full faith and credit has never been suspect. It's never been a question of whether we're going to honor our commitments. Well, Mr. President, next week or very shortly after, that history is going to be put potentially in jeopardy. And I just got to tell you, I have heard those who say, well, we can prioritize payments. There is no business group in America or no economist that I know of, mostly from left to right, who believes that somehow America can partially default in prioritized payments. We're going to pay interest, we're going to pay our troops. Those of us who've served at state levels realize that sometimes our budgets are close to 50% pass-throughs from the federal government. The presiding officer, governor of the great state of West Virginia. How long before West Virginia defaults if America starts prioritizing its payments? How many other Detroits will there be all across America if we were to take this type of irresponsible action? And even if there was some possibility that there might be some chance of some logic behind this partial payment scheme, it's never been tried before. No industrial country has ever got this close to a default. Why would we take the chance? Why would we play Russian roulette with only one bullet and two chambers? Something that at this moment, for our national economy and the world economy, could be devastating. So, Mr. President, I know seem to be all repeating ourselves on both sides, but to me it seems pretty easy in a negotiation. We've got differences. I would say to my colleagues, I've probably made folks on my side more angry than almost anyone else on these issues around getting our country's balance sheet in order. I'm anxious to continue those discussions about tax reform, about entitlement reform, about bringing our debt to GDP ratio down. But not only has that kind of negotiation while you've got the government shut down and the full faith and credit of the United States potentially in jeopardy. So let's open the government, not just because we hear some tragic story about one component of the government, not just because we need to come and make that case about food inspectors, about National Science Foundation, about NASA Langley, where we do aeronautics research, 3,500 people, 7 people were at work last week. China, India, other nations around the world are not stopping their research, not stopping their investments because we can't get our act together. Open this government, take off the table the idea that America would default, and then I am anxious to join with colleagues on both sides of the aisle to get our country's balance sheet in order. But to continue to hold this economy and these stories of these Americans' lives in this limbo is irresponsible beyond words. So, Mr. President, I hope that we will go ahead and agreeing with my colleagues who've spoken already. Let's get this government open. Let's take and make sure that we're going to honor and pay our debts. And let's get to the very, very real, important questions of how we get our nation's balance sheet right.